Good morning, everybody. Welcome to a fabulous May Day here at the Garden and to the Member Speaker Series. My name is Kate Gleason, and I'm the Membership Director here at the Garden. Privileged to have that job and help bring so many members into the Garden and to events like this. Before we dive in on hostas today, a couple of announcements. You may have seen scrolling in the slides beforehand that the little shop around the corner is having a member spring open house today. So it's 20% added to whatever your regular member discount is, either 10 or 20%, add 20% to that. They're open today until 4 p.m. So if you have a chance to wander down or drive down, I think everybody knows where the little shop is, right there at the intersection of Shaw and Vandevender, right by World's Fair Donuts. I think everybody knows that. So stop in. They have some great, fantastic homewares. Also, I want to talk about the next two speaker series because I think there are two great programs coming up. On Tuesday, June 25th, I should say, we will be right back here at 11 a.m. to welcome MBG scientist Wendy Applequist, who is on the staff of our William L. Brown Center. Wendy has edited a new volume that has been published by the MBG Press called Love Them to Death. This new book explores a variety of economic uses for invasive plants, from food, drink, and medicines to baskets, biofuel, and paper. Wendy will be here to share some of the stories from her book and will help us think about how we can turn troublesome plant species into useful resources. Again, that's June 25th. In July, invasives will creep into the conversation again when we welcome author Paula Wyman, who will be discussing her book, Bad Naturalist, which is a blend of memoir, natural history, and conservation science. In her often humorous book, Paula chronicles her unexplained and humbling journey to restored retired farmland to natural habitat in the Blue Ridge Mountains. I think we're in for a real treat. Paula is a short story writer and writer of fiction, but turned to memoir when she bought this piece of land in Virginia. And it's been quite a fun talking to her in booking this event. So I think she's going to be a great speaker. That event is on July 22nd at 11 a.m. So do mark your calendars. Also, our next issue of the Bulletin will be dropping in about a week or two. So keep an eye out for that. Both of those programs are listed in that bulletin. And of course, registration for those programs is now open. You can register by going online. You can call the phone number on the back of your membership card, or while you're here today, you can always stop by and the membership assistant at the desk can help you register for those programs. Now on to today's speaker. When we wanted to do a program on hostas, we did not have to look very far. Today's speaker is Gene Pulliam, who is a member of the Garden's Members Board, which is actually the group that plans the Member Speaker Series, so it was very easy to find. Gene is a retired bank executive of 42 years who turned his love of gardening into a full-time hobby upon his retirement 3 years ago. Gene's personal garden in Glendale has been featured in several local magazines and was a showstopper during the Garden's 2024 garden tour. In addition to tending his own charming garden, Gene is known as the Secret Gardener because he is a private gardener for a small group of 8 lucky clients. I have a feeling, though, that secret part could change easily if Gene wants to expand his business after today's program. Today, we're here to talk about hostas, and Gene is a fitting speaker. He is a collector of rare and hard-to-find hostas and is the immediate past president of the St. Louis Hosta Society. Additionally, Gene is part of the volunteer crew who helps care for the Garden's own hosta collection. I'm so excited to introduce you to Gene today, and I also want to thank other members of the Hosta Society who are here today to help answer questions after the program. They will be out in the Hosta Garden if you want to go explore. It's a lovely day to be here, so let's dig in. Gene.
Okay, thank you. Everybody hear me now? All right, good. So first of all, thank you for being here. Thank you, Kate, for all you do for membership. And I want to start with some things to tell you what I'm not before we get going. I am not a master gardener. I am not a landscape architect. I don't do any of those things. Everything that I do is a love of gardening, and I'm a garden artist. I create what I see, I enjoy it, I rip things out, I put them back in, I change them around, but that's what I am, and I'm a self-taught gardener from a very young age. So I thought I would start there today to let you know, how did I get from being a 42-year banker to this? Because it's a big change. And it's been a good change, by the way. In fact, I saw one of my former employees walk in. I was shocked. He says, "Are you retired yet?" I said, "Oh, yeah, 3 years ago." So with that, about the age of 7, I had a grandmother. And my grandmother, by the way, was my grandfather's 8th wife. That is a true story. She was not my blood grandmother, but she loved gardening, and I loved it when I got to spend my weekends with her on the farm. Very primitive old farm, buildings falling down. But what was beautiful was her gardens. And I remember her taking me around all the time by the hand, showing me her garden. And I just loved that. It felt natural to me, even as a kid. I wanted to be like that. We'd sit around in the evening in the hammock and we would look at all of the hummingbirds flying around, all the trumpet vine that seemed to be growing everywhere. So that if you've been in my garden, you realize I have stuff everywhere. That's probably where it started a long time ago. The other part of me being a kid was we lived in the small town of Harrisonville, south of Kansas City, and my parents were driven nuts all the time by me always dragging things home. I was always playing with the neighbor kids. I had a German Shepherd in tow, or a raccoon, or a possum, and we lived in town. And so my dad got a little irritated with the idea that I was always putting these animals in his garage. You can imagine what had happened. Fast forward till it's about the 7th grade, they decided it was time to move to the country because they could do no more of this. We moved to the country. My dad says, there's a little spot down there for you. It's down by the woods. Keep your animals and snakes out of the house and just go down there with them, will you? Well, I went down and I went online and I found something. I didn't go online then. I did something. I don't know what it was, but that was before me. But I found that there were free trees coming from the Missouri Conservation Department. So I got these free trees and I created this entrance to the forest, which was a garden entrance to where all my animals would be kept that I drug home. I didn't believe in putting animals in little cages, so I had these fortresses built into trees for my raccoon and things like that. People got to where my mom would be irritated. They'd come to the house. They wanted to see my zoo and not the house. So this got instilled in me very young. Let's move forward a little bit more. Then I got to be a foreign exchange student in high school. I went to Denmark, and the family I lived with had an English cottage garden in Denmark. Well, that struck me too. So if you've been to my house, I'll say that again. My house now today is an English cottage garden. I created that and got that inspiration then. I was in the cattle business for about 42 years or 25 years into the 42 years of banking, and that cattle business was a giant garden to me. I had 120 acres and the entire thing was a garden. So those of you who know me, if I've got it, I got to plant it. Well, 120 acres, you don't quite do that, but I wanted to protect the animals. So my dad and I had a plan that we would create a berm all the way around the 120 acres. And instead of replacing the old fences, we left those there, moved in 10 to 12 feet and built the new fences and kept a wildlife berm all the way around the farm. Other farmers thought I was crazy because what are you doing? I didn't want the cattle into the creeks. I didn't want all that stuff. So I created this garden that became something of the love of my life along with the cattle business. Then I got a call one day about 13 years ago and said, will you move to St. Louis with my job? So I came here, was going to be here for a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of years, and then I was going back home. Well, you see, that worked out for me. 7 years ago, I bought my house in Glendale, which I absolutely love and adore. And I had a neighbor by the name of Wendy who was involved in the St. Louis Hosta Society. She said, you've got some shade and you've got some hostas. You should join the Hosta Society. I had no idea what she was talking about. Something's happened. Well, she started showing me lists of hostas and all the little ones you could collect. And I didn't realize that it was a great big thing you could get into. And I decided I was going to collect every hosta there was. That's not possible. It's absolutely impossible almost. In fact, we're going to dive here in a minute and start talking about hostas, but I can tell you that she introduced me to that, and I've got friends now because of the Hosta Society that I absolutely love, and we've learned a lot together. So I'm not going to stand up on this stage and everything. I'm going to walk around a little bit, but what I want to do is dive into hostas and why and what's out there. Now, don't get fooled by these numbers. These numbers almost don't mean anything at this point. 7,000 available internationally. That number's changing all the time. 3,500 that are registered. That means that they're registered with the American Hosta Society. I've seen that number be 2,500, 3,500, and it grows. It changes every day because there are hybridizers all over the place who are changing them. So it's always a moving number. So don't get affixed on that number because it's going to change. It is not native to the United States. We know that they've been imported from other countries. What I want to talk about here is hostas being hostas, queen of the shade. All plants require light, even hostas. Some people get affixed with the idea of having hostas in the deep, dark shades of their garden, and it'll work a little bit for a while. Now, darker the hosta, the happier it is in the shade, but most of them require a lot more light than that. The best shade or dappled shade for hostas is high canopy trees where light can get in. They just don't want to be burned to death, but most of them need a lot of that as well. So as we talk about hostas, remember, if you've got some, we're going to talk about some more detail in a minute, that are a lot more sun tolerant, they can take more. We're going to get into some fun here now. All right, before we get going, raise your hand if you've got this hosta in your garden. And if you do, I'm going to come sit down next to you. That is the prettiest hosta I've ever seen that does not exist. So if you're one of those people like me at 3 in the morning because you can't sleep and your Facebook pops this thing up on you, don't bite. Because you're going to get this little thing that's green. It doesn't look like that. It'll never look like that. So be careful, okay? I've seen this pop up many times. I've had people, people will text me like, where do I get this hosta? I'm like, if you find it, let me know, because it doesn't exist. It's not out there. So be careful with that one. There are some developments happening in the space of hostas where there's red coming up in the stems and it's starting to show up in leaves, but nothing like that. They still have green. There's some beautiful ones out there. I've got one in my garden. Just lost the name of it, doesn't matter. They're out there. There's some beautiful ones happening. Let's talk about where to go to get hostas. Now, this is kind of fun for me. If you go to a lot of big box stores, you can get a lot of great buys and a lot of great hostas. That's a great thing. But what I want to caution you in is when you buy hostas from places where they are mass produced and they're mass shipped in, you are risking your garden for disease and things you may not want in your garden. That's where you're going to get some of them. So I'm not against necessarily buying them there, but you're taking risks about putting them in your garden. The best place to do is to buy them from good growers and growers who constantly are looking for ways to make sure that diseases are not getting into the hostas. They test for them all the time. They're always looking for them. And so when you go to garden centers that are not big box stores, they're usually buying from breeders or from hybridizers, or they're buying from growers that are actually testing to make sure none of that happens. Divide them. We're going to talk about that in a minute in a little more detail, but everybody thinks a lot of people say to me, I got to divide my hostas, they're getting too big. Not necessarily, but we'll talk about that in a second too. Plants from friends is a great way to get things. We'll cover that one. Member auctions. Now, this is where my addiction started going crazy. So during COVID, I remember that they had this online auction by the American Hosta Society. And so I got online, I started looking at these hostas I'd never seen. And I thought, wow, I need that in my garden. And I started going crazy and I started buying hostas and I spent money you don't even want to talk about. But I've got hostas in my garden that you're not going to find in most places. There are some there. I've got common ones. I've got some up here that are very common. I got some that are very rare that you might want to look at after we're done. And then it got crazier. I got invited to the national convention. The first one I went to was in Iowa. Then I went to Boston last year. And I can tell you that Phyllis and Janelle, who are sitting in the back of the room, they'd been in the society before I was, and they took me there. I think they knew what I was going to do. And so I decided I wanted to go out there and start bidding and competing against hybridizers who are looking for really rare hostas. And they're thinking, who's this guy? Who's this banker that showed up? And I started collecting some hostas that no one has. So if people have been through my garden, they'll say, you're not buying your hostas from local places. And I said, not really. There's some that are pretty rare out there. And I don't talk about them too much because I don't want people breaking in my yard in the middle of the night to steal my hostas. You know, some of them I keep in pots so I can lock them in the garage at night. You really got to come after them. I'm kidding. It's not that bad. Anyway, national conventions and some online, there are auctions, there are places out there to find them if you become a crazy collector like I am, because that is exactly what I am. So now I want to talk about things that will attack your hostas. These are questions I get all the time. How do I get rid of this? What's wrong with that? What's the problem? Why are those darn animals coming after my hostas? So what I would like to do is ask you, of that list out there, what do you think is the most destructive to your garden if you're a hosta person on that list? Just give me some ideas. Everybody says deer. Everybody says deer. Rabbits, slugs. We're going to talk about all these and tell you what I think about them all, and you're going to figure out what I have and what my opinion is about which is the most destructive up here. So the first one, slugs, they're nasty, they're slimy, they do all kinds of things, and they won't do too much to gardens unless you have hostas. And if you ignore it, they're going to get little holes all over your leaves, all over the place. And I've heard people say, well, I put beer out for them. They come in, drink the beer, they don't survive, they die. Or I put salt on the sidewalks when they crawl about. That'll work for about this many slugs. It's not going to work if you got a great big garden. My go-to is Sluggo or Sluggo Plus, which is a granular that you can order online. You can get it in a lot of places. And I use Sluggo aggressively in the spring when the hostas start coming up so that I can get ahead of the slugs. And about every 2 to 3 weeks, I go out and I put that Sluggo on my garden to make sure, because what it does, they eat it and they go back in their little hole and they never come back out again. So that's the most effective I've had on slugs. The next one, cutworms and caterpillars, not too much of a problem, but later in the season, you might start seeing this a little bit. They'll eat your leaves a little bit. That's usually probably the least I would be concerned about on this list. The third one there is nematodes. Most people don't even know what a nematode is or if you've even got it. If you look at your leaves later in the season, usually, nematodes are a very, very small microscopic worm that lives down in the bottom of the stem of that plant. And as they migrate, they move up into a leaf, and they move into a leaf between the veins of a leaf. If you see holes or things happening across the lines in that leaf, that's usually not a nematode. A nematode's going to stay within that vein of that leaf, and it's going to just show up there. As of now, there is nothing that you can do to spray or get rid of that. There used to be a product that went away, but the commercial people took it all, and so you can't even get it. You're never going to see it usually until later when things start getting stressed and you see it more and it shows up. Most people have this in their gardens, especially in this part of the country. It's not the end of the world, but it can make your plants look kind of funny with that little worm in there. Voles. You might have just figured mine out. Those little things, I thought they were cute. Got their little tunnels running around, all that kind of stuff. They don't have any purpose. They think they're a mouse and they're not, because they don't run on top of the ground because they're chickens. They don't go under the ground like a mole because they got work to do and egg grubs and things. But those little guys just running around, and you're thinking, oh, well, how about that? They will annihilate a garden, especially if you've got hostas. I found out the hard way. So I have my hostas for 2-3 years. Next thing you know, I go out there one day and my hosta was gone. You reach down, the hosta's just laying on the ground. They've eaten the entire root system. That's what they do. They just destroy the root system. So I went to war with the voles. I set little traps. I caught them live. Those little sticky things that you catch mice with? I got a whole bunch of them, put them clear across my patio. It was kind of ugly the next morning. And I caught some that way. Once in a while I'd get one when I was working in the garden. I'd see them, and that's a lucky shot. You're never going to catch them. What I'm telling you is a lot of those things aren't really effective. I've used Volex, which is a poison that you got to keep after them. But what I found to be the most effective was one of two things. First one I use is Vol Scram. It is a commercial product. It is all organic. It is herbs is what it is, and they can't stand the smell. Got a little garlic, I got all kinds of herbs in there, but it's a granule and you spread it over your entire garden to push them out. When it rains or you water it in 20 minutes or longer, it seeps in the ground and they do not like it. They will leave. They are gone. The other one is Repellex. Repellex actually works on voles and rabbits and all kinds of things if you get it on the ground before your hostas come up, so that it actually gets into the stems and everything, so that the rabbits don't even like the taste of it. I actually tested it on a couple of gardens this year with some of my clients, and it's worked so far, because we had rabbits that wouldn't just. I don't like rabbits, and I like animals. I don't like rabbits. I hate voles. So that worked. But what I'm telling you is, with any of these pests, you need to be absolutely relentless. Because if you're not, They are. They will not stop. They will keep coming and keep coming and keep coming. And so I play a game with them. And about every 3 to 4 months, I put this Vol Scram on, or I put the Repellex now, and it seems to have done the job. I don't have any sign of a vole in my yard, which is about a year and a half, 2 years in the making now. But I can tell you, if anybody who knows me, they get tired of hearing about the voles because I was mad. When you start eating my hostas, I paid a whole lot of money for it. We got a problem, and you're going to lose. Deer, bless them, cute, Bambi. If you're a hosta lover, no thanks. In fact, if you're a daylily, not that either. I have a good friend that lives over in Ladue, and he said, you know, my daylilies never bloom anymore. I'm like, it's because when you're not looking, the deer are eating the tops of them off as candy when you're not looking. They do the same thing to a hosta bed. It is a salad bar. They're going to eat it all. They're going to go after it. So some of the things that work, and this is where you probably have to be more relentless with deer and rabbits than anything. If you use Bob-X or Liquid Fence or Deer Off or Rabbit Off or all of those, they're all out there. Don't get stuck on the same one. One of the things that I've learned is that the reason it doesn't work for most people is because it's sitting in the bottle on the shelf in their garage. You got to use it. You got to get it out there, and every time it rains, you got to spray again and spray again and spray again. It is a relentless project. Another thing that works, probably the best thing that works if you have the ability to do this, a former member of the Hosta Society in St. Louis, who was a dear friend to many of us, Pam Wolkowitz, she had a place way out south in the country. Now imagine trying to be a hosta person way out south in the country. That's like, you might as well give up before you start. She contacted the Missouri Conservation Department and said, how do I get around all of these deer that want my hostas before I start spending all this money? And she had a collection that was unbelievable. In fact, a lot of her collection's in my garden today. They said, if you build a 6-foot fence or higher that's solid, that they can't see into, they will not jump into that pen. And they won't. She never had a deer problem, right? She never had a deer problem because it was a solid fence that went all the way around her hosta garden and they couldn't see into it. If you build a 6-foot fence that they can see through, they're going to jump right over that thing and go in there and have fun. Otherwise, it's got to be 8 feet or higher. So if you have the ability to do that or the resources and you really like hostas and you're crazy about it like I am, build a big old fence because it'll work. It'll work, but that's an expensive one. Southern blight. Southern blight is a fungus that gets on your hostas, and it's very common in this, especially with all of the mold and mildew and everything that's around this year. Southern blight is something you can get sprays for, fungus for, but what I saw it in my garden once, what will happen is your leaves are kind of start falling over, and you can actually pick them up and they actually break off easily. That'll tell you might have southern blight. I use a 10% Clorox solution and just spray the crowns of them, and it seemed to have gotten rid of it, and I've had a southern blight in my yard for 2-3 years now. So that's an easy one. Hosta virus X. Hosta virus X, you won't know if you've got it until it's too late usually. We actually test for HVX here at the garden. We have people who know what they're looking for. We test it because we don't want it in the garden. If you find out you have HVX, which by the way can come through large container stores where it's not tested, all the growers test for this all the time to make sure they're not selling it out into the market to get it out there. If HVX shows up, the leaves will look like they're starting to crumble. They curl up. They look funny. They look suspect. If we find one or we test one that shows positive, you have to dig the plant up, put it in a plastic bag, and throw it in the trash, and don't plant anything in that spot for at least 3 years. Yeah. Therefore, careful where you buy your hostas. That's the point of this right here, is the HVX to hosta people is something you don't want. Because once it's there and it's transferred through the sap in the plants. So how we make sure, when we're working here in the garden, people are like, why do you keep spraying everything with Lysol? Between every single plant that we dig or cut, we make sure we spray our tools with Lysol to make sure we're disinfecting for any kind of diseases or anything that we might transfer from one plant to another. So you have to make sure you do that. I do that in my own garden even, and I've never seen this in my garden or seen signs of it, but I don't want it. So I make sure that every time I cut my hostas off in the fall, I spray the tools. If I dig one up, I spray the tools. That's your biggest defense against spreading anything around your garden, is to make sure that you do that. All right. This other one, I put weeds down here as pests. This is always so funny to me. So I have a good neighbor who said, hey, I need to talk to you about my garden. Why don't you come down here and I'll buy an expensive bottle of wine? I'm like, hey, that sounds like a good deal to me. Let's do it. So I go down there, we're walking around, and he said, I have some questions for you. And he said, how do I get the weeds out of my garden? I started making sure I drank some of that wine before I answered him. Drank a little more. I said, is that the question you really wanted to come down to me to talk about here? He said, yeah. How do I get the weeds out of my garden? Pull them. He said, you don't have any weeds in your garden. I said, coffee and wine. He said, okay, wait a minute. I don't get it. You're pouring that on your, no. In the morning when I'm walking around my garden with my coffee and I see a weed this big, I pull it up. And in the evening, the ones I miss with my glass of wine, I catch the rest of them. I pull my weeds. Now, if you've got a garden that's real dense, by this time of the year and later, I don't have weed problems because I pulled them when they're little and they're all shaded and they won't grow because everything is choking them out. So, you know, I like to talk about weeds and everybody's like, I got too many weeds. Just pull them or find a gardener that will. I'm out of business right now. I got too many. But anyway, I like to talk about that. If you have any questions, please hold them to the end, because this usually sparks lots of questions when I start talking about this. I hopefully answered a lot of the questions, but we're going to go on and have some fun here. Let's talk about separating hostas. Some people they like to do this to spread their hostas around. That's great. I have people who say, I've got this hosta that's too big. I got to separate it. And my first question is, why do you have to separate it? Thought I had to. No, you don't. A hosta will just get bigger and bigger and bigger if it's a giant hosta. And if you've got the space to let it get bigger and bigger, let it get bigger and bigger. You don't have to. If you want to move it around, that's great. Some hostas are easy to move around. Others are a little difficult. Ones with tight crowns that get bigger and bigger get really hard to move. I had a friend last year who said, I got to get rid of all my hostas. I need you to come get them because I'm going to do something different with my yard. Great. I said, sure, I'll do that. Some of you in this room know that I had to wrap them in burlap and move them with dollies and get people to help me get them into my truck. They were so big. But you can do that. Most people don't want to do that. If you want to separate them when they're younger and you've got the kind that are easy, if you've got some of the smaller ones, you dig them out of the ground, they'll just fall apart almost, and you can just separate them that way. If you've got that great big crown that you want to move and you think you've got to separate it, you'll never get it apart. You just got to stick a shovel and drive it through it and spread them around. You can do that. Some people, I've got a couple of pictures up here. It could be the start of a fairy ring, but not necessarily. That's what it's actually called. You'll see hostas that have been in the garden for a while. Sometimes some of them, not all of them, not many of them do, but some will start just growing in a ring. That's actually called a fairy ring. If that bothers you, you don't have to do anything with it. You can dig them up and put them back together and create a clump again. And we do that in the garden here quite a bit sometimes. When we see things getting too far apart, we pull them back together. Others grow directly from their crown and they don't do that. So it just depends on the hosta. You can do partial removers, leave them there, or just leave them alone. In my garden, once I plant something, I try not to dig it up too much, unless I'm digging a piece of it up for an auction or something to donate. But I'm telling you, this is all personal preference. It's what's important to you. My big ones, I want them to be really big, so I leave them alone. So let's talk about different varieties and textures. And by the way, these photographs are all out of my garden. They came from my garden. So you can see lots going on there. The answer is yes. It is a bad addiction. And every time I say, somebody who knows me well, I say, I don't have room for any more hostas. They're like, I've created ways to put more hostas in my garden. We're going to talk about that here. So, this is what my attic looks like in the middle of the winter. attic of my garage, where it gets cold at least 2 months out of the year. If you put your hostas in your basement, that's not going to work. They're not coming back. They have to go dormant for at least 2 months out of the year. A lot of people think that hostas don't grow in Florida because it's too hot. That is not true necessarily. It's because they don't go dormant. So they are an annual in the southern part of the country. They have to go dormant. So I drag up into my attic every year about 60 pots that out of my, these pots all go in my attic every year. We'll see how long I do that. I get help now to drag them out because it's a big job. But every year, I know it's about time for them to come out and for me to start watering them. And by the way, people say, do you water them all winter? I know. I don't do anything. Once I stick them up there in the attic, I ignore them till March. And then I have to think, wait a minute, we've had a few warm days. And this one on the right lives up to its name every year. Its name's Gunsmoke. Gunsmoke comes flying up out of there in the attic, looks like that every year, which tells me it's time to go. We got to get them out of the attic. We got to go. It always is the first one to pop up like that, and it's almost white because it's had no light sticking in the attic. So I bring them outside, start watering them and fertilize them, and off we go. Then the freeze starts threatening. Guess what I do? Drag them back in the garage again. And I do about 2 or 3 times. I don't put them in the back of the attic. I just drag them in the garage. But I protect them. And the reason that you want to put pots inside, one, to protect your pot because it's going to crack after a while. But the other one is you don't want that crown to freeze. In the ground, that doesn't happen because water and moisture and things don't collect on top of the crown. They naturally disperse. If you have a pot sitting out there and you have a bad freeze with a lot of water and things and it freezes, it can actually freeze the crown and kill it. My larger pots that I have outside, I put a heap of I almost said compost, of mulch, yes, that word, mulch. I put a mulch on the top of them so that they're protected. And then in the spring, I take all that mulch off. So yes, I have an addiction and it just keeps growing and growing. And the reason I started doing pots was because one, gave me more room in my garden because my garden's full. I mean, it's full. There's no more room. So you just find a spot where there's 3 hostas and you put a pedestal about that tall and you put another pot on it. And now all of a sudden you've got this gigantic pile of hostas growing everywhere. It's pretty cool. And that's what it looks like. So this is actually from my garden. You can see the contrast between the big ones and the little ones. That's giant blue down there at the bottom, one of the first ones I ever put in my garden, and it kind of takes over every year. And they've got some old antique things up there that I plant little ones in, and those little ones just get covered up. I put a lot of mulch on them. I leave them there. I don't move them in, and then I uncover them, and they come back every year. That usually happens. So it's fun, and I got this idea from Wendy because I went down to her when I got my addiction going. In her yard, she had all these things she was planting things in old tubs, which is so my style because I'm a bit of a farm kid. So I have stuff all over my garden that I plant. Let's talk about a few of my favorite ones. Victory, this one, Victory can take a lot of light. Victory goes and goes and goes. This hosta, actually, that one right there, a third of it will be in our hosta auction in July. I've already separated part of it out, so it's growing in a pot. This one will get very large. It's happy with the sun. This one gets about actually 3 hours in the heat of the day. It's between 2 houses, and when the sun comes up in the heat of the day, it gets it, but it never burns. Now, if I'd left it out there in heat all day long and said fry, it'll eventually get it, but it does really well with a lot of light. Sting's a favorite. You kind of see the leaves down there. I love the way it grows, but I put this up here for this reason, to talk about pollinators. A lot of people are like, you have all those darn hostas in your garden, but you have nothing for pollinators. Well, that's my shade garden. Sun garden's got plenty of that. But if you have hostas and you know that in about June, most of them are blooming, the bumblebees will be all over them. They're everywhere. And sometimes the hummingbirds find them. They like them too. So they do have a benefit. They are great for your garden. And I will always say that when people tell me differently. T-Rex, that's another one. This is actually about a 2.5, 3-year-old picture because it's about 3 times that size now, about to take over the corner of the garden. I think that's where he got his name. I'm going to be big, so watch out. Diamond Lake, this is actually the largest one in my garden right now, bigger than Empress Wu, and I think it's because of the season we're having. Diamond Lake is pretty common. You can find it at a lot of garden centers. I have it planted in a place that gets great morning light, and it is over 6 feet across now. You wait till you see it. It's gigantic. It's over 6 feet across. I leave it alone. It just keeps coming bigger and bigger every year. It is probably one of my favorite in my garden. I like it because of the type of leaves and everything on it. It's really beautiful. Royal Wedding. This is where you talk about your friends. So Royal Wedding was named after, obviously, a royal wedding that happened once. And my friend Janelle Crashone, she's the only one that I know of. Some of you may have this, is the only one who I knew had this in her garden. And Janelle decided she was going to help share that with me. And Janelle and I are not competitive friends at all, till it comes to hostas. So she said, if you'll help me divide that, I'll let you have part of it. I said, great. So we dug it up. I took part of it. I go home, and Janelle wasn't very happy because the part I dug up got bigger than hers. Now, I can tell you after a couple of seasons, they're both the same size. They're beautiful, but Royal Wedding is a beautiful hosta and has center stage in my garden as well. Risky business. Some of these are a lot of fun. Looks a lot like snake eyes, risky business. There's a whole bunch of them that look like that. Well, the one thing about risky business is you have to watch that it doesn't revert back to some of its original plant before it was hybridized. So, and so you'll see, I'm not going to get into that, but what will happen is you'll have just a solid leaf, green leaf start coming up. And then you've got to go in and divide that out because you don't want it to take over the plant. Next thing you know, you've got a green plant and you don't have your risky business anymore. Mine's not doing much of that, but I watch them very closely. That's this one standing right here. Night Before Christmas is exactly that plant. This is one of my favorites in my garden. There's a whole series, Night Before Christmas, Christmas Toast, Christmas Island, Christmas. Somebody was into something when they were doing that. But they are absolutely beautiful hostas. I will tell you that the saddest story of the year for me right now is I paid a lot of money for a really good stock of White Christmas 2 years ago. It is the only one that did not come back this year. It is a sad story. Here's the part. I paid $400 for it. Don't do that, because that's the one that will die, I promise. Now, I should have known. I should have been better, because Phyllis, who you're going to meet in the garden if you go out today, Phyllis Weidman is where I've gotten a lot of my knowledge. She's been around the Hosta Society forever. She's volunteered in the garden forever. But she will tell you that White Christmas, which is in this garden, don't move it, don't touch it, leave it alone. It's finicky. It's in a perfect place. This one is actually featured in Hosta Encyclopedia, or Hostapedia is what it's called. It's featured in a lot of publications, this very one in this garden. So if you go out there, ask to see White Christmas. It used to be in my garden. It's no longer there, and I'm not going to replace it because I'm kind of fussy about it. So all the other Christmases are going to survive. And by the way, White Christmas is pretty white, and it takes a lot of light because it doesn't have a lot of green in it for photosynthesis to convert the energy. And that's another reason that the lighter the plants are, the more light they need. That's because they don't have a lot of green to do the work. So you got to get everything you can get from the sun. There's that giant blue again. Journey's Inn. Journey's Inn, this came out of Pam Wolkowitz's garden again. You've heard me talk about her a couple of times now, and you're going to hear me talk about her again in just a minute. Journey's Inn was a favorite one. It's a beautiful hosta, but if you'll notice underneath the name, there's an NR under there. You might have seen that on another one. NR means it's non-registered. And we're going to talk about that more. It means it's not been registered with the Hosta Society, and it's somebody named it. They never went to the work to do that and to actually register it. It may be registered now. That giant blue one I was been showing you, it was non-registered at one time. It's now registered, and you can find it in Hostapedia. It's out there. But this is a beautiful one. Fragrant bouquet. That's actually not a good picture of fragrant bouquet. Mine's about 3 times that size. In fact, the person who waters for me when I'm out of town tries to steal it all the time. She loves that one. I always talk about this one because this one doesn't seem to burn. In fact, you've got it in your garden too. If you've got a really sunny spot for a lot of time of the day, this one seems to just get lighter and lighter with the more light that it gets. It doesn't really burn up a lot like some will. I have this one in a pot. I drag it in and out every year. It sits on my patio with some part shade. In the afternoon, it gets some hot, hot sun, and it is never burned. So that's a fun one. Curly fries. I put this up here because there's all kinds of variations of these hostas, obviously. One of the favorite ones in my garden when people come through the gate is Wiggles and Squiggles. It's that way. It's kind of a funny name to me. But they like a lot of light as well. This one actually grows under the edge of that Victory hosta that you just saw. It kind of protects it a little bit, but if it doesn't get enough sun, it isn't very happy. Alley-oop. Anybody got this in their garden? Good. And if I see you come toward the stage and rush me, I'll know why, because it's sitting right here. Alley-oop came from National Convention. That's one of those that a lot of people were bidding on because they wanted to take it back to hybridize it, because you'll notice it's got leaves and variegation, all kinds of things that you're not going to see in most houses. A guy by the name of Dave Chopko, he brings a lot of these hostas to the convention. He's a great guy. He's won awards for bringing so many different types that he has from his garden, and that's one that I protect with a lot. It's a favorite of mine. It is one day when it's big enough and I'm brave enough to put it in the ground. I just keep putting it in a bigger pot right now because I don't want to. It's kind of like one of those crazy ones like the White Christmas I told you about, but more. Anyway, that one's a rare one. One of the things that I've done to curtail my habit now is that I tried to go after rare things that most people don't have, because I love that. That's why I like to go to National Convention. That's why I like to do those things like that. And that's where you're going to find things like alley-oop. They're hard to find. There's alley-oop, and there's another one here. This one, Siriu, very rare. You're not going to find a lot of those around. Most of the other ones up here you can find if you look hard enough. Joyride. This one I just put here because I like it kind of talks to its name. You can see that it's in a galvanized tub. I go to an antique mall. That's another thing I like to do in the wintertime. And I'm like, if I can plant it, I'm going to buy it, because I'm always looking for ways to put my hostas out there and do things. Pam's Legacy. I absolutely love this hosta, not because of the hosta, but because of the person it came from. So Pam Wolkowitz, before she got out of the hosta business, and she wasn't in the business, she collected. She was a serious collector. She went to conventions. She did all those things. She retired and moved to Florida and had a huge hosta dispersal sale. And before she did that, she actually donated this hosta to the St. Louis Hosta Society auction. And I happened to be out of town. I'm like, oh no, don't be having no auction without me. And so I planted a buyer that got on the phone with me, and I'm in the hills of somewhere, I don't even know. But I said, don't let anybody get that hosta. He said, Gene, it's getting expensive. I said, no, just get that hosta. When I got it, it was unnamed. Pam had actually purchased it from a hybridizer, and it got it as a seedling, so it had not been named yet, which means I really had to have it, because that means I could control the name of it. Like, oh, I like this. I'm kind of getting into this. So I buy this hosta at the auction, and we'll just say I didn't spend as much as I did on that one up there. But I got this hosta, I got it home, I put it in the garden, and I thought I just want to stabilize it. Then I got the wild idea. I thought, I'm going to talk to somebody and have it tissue cultured so they can take it to a tissue culture lab and multiply it and everything. And then, whoa, don't get so excited, buddy. You got to make sure it gets stable. I'm like, that it's going to stay that way. That's not going to revert back to its original plants and all kinds of things. So I planted it in my garden, and it's in the same spot, and it's absolutely beautiful this year. But before Pam left and moved, we had a little informal ceremony in my garden, and I named this hosta after Pam's Legacy. So it is not registered. I have not gone through all of that because I wanted to make sure this is going to be a stable plant that's going to be there. And if you break into my garden, I'll know what you're after, so just be careful. So this is a favorite, and I protect it. It's in a great space, and I wanted to make sure it's going to show off before I do anything with it. But it's named now, and we made her cry and all kinds of things whenever we dedicated it to her. This is the most important thing to me of the Hosta Society. Gardening brings people together in ways that other things just don't do. I have some of my best friends in this room today because of the Hosta Society. They put their arms around me. They taught me everything that I know. I volunteer on Thursdays just because I learn so much at the garden, because they're always teaching and we learn about diseases and all kinds of things. On the top left there is Janelle Crashone and Phyllis Weidman, who I've been talking about. They're both sitting in the back and they'll be out in the garden after if you would like to get to know them. That's us at the convention last year up in Boston, just before I got to go to another auction. Love that. On the top right, that's Dave Chopko. You've heard me talk about Dave Chopko is the guy who has a huge collection in the Northeast and brings a lot of great hostas. I've already been told, and you all don't be spreading the word, but last year he baited us and told us that there's going to be a hosta this year that's only in like 3 gardens in the United States. You wait. It's like an ambition. Retired bankers that go into the hosta business, they're kind of crazy. So anyway, I'm after it. And he baited us and told us that. So I'm going to be on the look for that hosta this year. And the bottom, that guy in the middle, Darman, if anybody's been around the garden very much, Darman spent 42 years in the garden here at the hosta. And see, he helped us. We worked together. He was a great guy. We go to breakfast a time or two. But I can tell you that I could do without the hostas all day long as I had the friends that I have in this hosta business. It's really important to me. So before you leave today, outside is also a table that the Hosta Society is here. If you have an interest in the Hosta Society, and by the way, it is not a real fussy formal group, or I wouldn't belong. I like to have fun. We meet, we go to a lot of gardens. You get into gardens that people don't always see, that are private gardens around St. Louis. We do things together. We've taken road trips. We have little meetings, but they're never we don't spend a lot of time in meetings because we all like to just get in the gardens and check out the hosta business. So if you're interested, Lynn Teller, who is the Secretary-Treasurer of the Hosta Society, is out there to talk to you. And also remember that the 2 ladies that I've talked about a lot will be out in the garden. The other thing is, this next Saturday is the hosta sale here at the garden from 9 to 5. And I can tell you, if you're really interested in that, you might be here at 9:05. Because the best go the quickest, the biggest ones go the quickest. The good thing about it this year is that many of us spent some time in the garden 3 weeks ago, and there was going to be about 75 plants that came out of the Botanical Garden in that sale next weekend. So we separated a lot of them. They've got potted up. They're beautiful plants, and they're things that you may not be able to find other places. So that sale is this Saturday if you would like to be here. And finally, the secret idea has gotten out, so it's no secret anymore. If you've been on any of the garden tours, you've seen this house before. That's my space in Glendale that I absolutely love. And now I'm going to get back up on stage, and if you have questions, I'm going to take questions now.
Okay, good. I think that just about wraps it up, and we're at time. So I obviously want to thank Gene for all this information and passion.
Thank you.